In the middle of the 18th century, Teresian or Discalced Carmelites in England numbered just 16 priests. The English mission, which was organized from Tangray in Belgium, was finally reduced in 1827 to one priest, a Father Francis Willoughby Brewster, who died in 1849, and with him the order came to an end in England. His memory lingered on for many years in Market Rayson in Lincolnshire, which he evangelized for some 50 years. 13 years later, in 1862, at the invitation of Cardinal Wiseman, a convert Jew from Hamburg came to London to restore the order. He was Herman Cohen, a remarkable man by any standard, famous as a brilliant musician before his conversion, more famous as a Carmelite priest. The manner of his conversion was no long drawn-out affair, or moor and fen, or crag and torrent like John Henry Newman's. What made his conversion remarkable was the fact that it took place during benediction of the Blessed Sacrament, on his first visit to a Catholic church, where he seemed to have heard from the host a voice saying to him, "I am the way, the life, and the truth." He never looked back. Like St. Paul, he was able to say, "Scio cui crediti," I know him in whom I trust. Herman Cohen was born on the 10th of November 1821 in Hamburg, which had a population of 230,000, with no less than 25,000 Jews. He was the child of Rosalie Benjamin Cohen and David Abraham Cohen, a wealthy banker. He lived in a world where money meant everything. Later, after his conversion, he would write, "Our house was like a nest of ants, where people came and went. Merchandise was everywhere, people counting money all over the place, and the only distinction accorded to businessmen was that of the size of their fortune, to which every honor was given." Unquote. In Hebrew, the name Cohen means priest. The Cohens are descendants from the high priest Aaron to the priestly tribe of Levi. In a Jewish synagogue, the Kohanim exercised the priestly office by laying hands in blessing from the steps of the sanctuary. Herman and his elder brother Albert were sent to the best school in Hamburg, where both made excellent progress. Herman's progress was indeed exceptionally good. In Greek and Latin, he surpassed all his fellow students, none of whom were under 14 years of age, while Herman was only 9 years of age. At 4½ he received his first lesson in music, and within months he revealed an unusual talent for music. At the age of 6, he was able to play many of the arias of the operas then staged, as well as showing an unusual aptitude for improvisation. He was sent to a professor of music who, while his teaching was excellent, his morals were not all that good. "As I saw him admired by everyone," Herman wrote in his Confessions, "I soon wanted to imitate him, and I began to imitate his behavior. He loved gambling, so I too took to it very early on. He loved horses and pleasure, and as he always found admirers ready to supply him with money for his exploits, I began to conceive the notion that there was no life happier than that of an artist." Unquote. It was decided that Herman should give a concert in his native city. The concert hall was packed to overflowing. He was the talk of the city. He was a prodigy. His mother, convinced that a brilliant future was in store for him, took him to the Grand Duke of Mecklenburg-Strelitz and the hereditary Grand Duke of Schwerin. They, in turn, gave him introductions to their ambassadors at the court of the King of France. It was while waiting to travel to Paris that Herman composed a cantata in honor of his mother, his first musical composition, which brought him much praise in the musical journals of the day. On reaching Paris, a professor had to be found for him. At the beginning of the 19th century, Famous musicians were to be found in Paris. Cherubini directed the Conservatoire. There were Chopin, Zimmermann, Mendelssohn, Paganini, and Franz Liszt, just 20 years old. Finally, Liszt was chosen, who, on account of pressing engagements, at first was not inclined to take on a new pupil, but on hearing Herman play, changed his mind. Liszt treated Herman as one of his most privileged pupils, introduced him to society, and often asked him to play in public. At the touch of his small fingers, Herman fascinated his audiences. The daily newspapers were filled with his praise, and all foretold a brilliant future for him. Soon, no musical soiree was considered complete without him. Early in 1834, when Herman was 13 years of age, Liszt organized an assembly of celebrities to which Herman was also invited. Liszt and his brilliant pupil were inseparable. Although Liszt was a practicing Catholic in his youth, he grew lax when he began to associate with liberals like Lamartine, Lamennais, Victor Hugo, and Saint-Beuve. Liszt was a well-known philanderer. Writing later to Father Marie-Alphonse Ratisbonne, Herman admitted, "I was spoiled in the salons with its secular society. Soon they were determined to make me the scapegoat of all their reprehensible ideas: atheism, pantheism, socialism, anarchy, terrorism, abolition of marriage, communism, and hedonism. There was room for all this in the head of a 14-year-old youth." Unquote. If a revolution had broken out, Herman wrote in his confessions, "I should at once have seized a musket, and I felt ready to die for a cause about which I really knew nothing." Liszt decided that it was time his most promising pupil, now 14, should give a concert. It was a great success. Herman played brilliantly. The ladies of the court, the diplomatic corps, and the nobility attended in large numbers. To the dismay of Herman, Liszt suddenly decided to leave Paris for Switzerland. Liszt was about to elope with Marie, the Countess d'Agoult, who was in fact a wife and a mother. Nevertheless, Herman determined to join his master. At first, Liszt refused, but finally agreed. 3 months later, Herman left for Geneva, accompanied by his mother and his sister of 11 years. Geneva at that time was in the process of establishing a Conservatoire de Musique, and Liszt was asked to give some lessons. Liszt decided to accept the invitation on condition that he himself would attend to the advanced pupils, while Herman, a boy of 15, would take on the other pupils. Liszt also persuaded the Academy to recognize Herman as professor of music, and thus Herman earned and squandered a lot of money. It was at Geneva that Herman became acquainted with the philosophies of Voltaire and Rousseau. It was also at Geneva that Herman succumbed to the habit of gambling at a concert organized by the Prince Belgioso and his wife. After the concert, Herman was introduced for the first time to the gambling tables. Later, Herman wrote, "I think it was the first time that I had ever seen this sort of game, and I eagerly followed the fortunes of the players. Large sums of money were lost and won. I asked if I might try something myself. It was there that the vice which ruled the best years of my life originated. It didn't give me a moment's rest, and often drove me to the verge of suicide because of the enormous losses I sustained." Unquote. Liszt, fearing that his long absence from Paris might seriously interfere with his fame there, decided to return. Herman again decided to follow him, notwithstanding his lucrative position as a professor at the Conservatoire. Liszt and the Countess finally drifted apart, while Herman became more involved in the life of gambling. He abandoned his mother and lived alone in a flat. Alone in his flat, after nights spent in play and dissipation, he became weary and often disgusted at his mode of living. His solitude depressed him. I began to suffer from that complaint which devours the world of idlers, he later wrote. Approaching himself for his heartless conduct towards his mother, he returned to her and her family. They welcomed him back. A change now took place in the manner of his living. The Princess Belgioso, a celebrity in society, and who herself was very musical, did much to rehabilitate him. She put him in charge of the many musical soirees she was wont to organize at her palace, and the remarkable singing voice of her husband, the prince, greatly contributed to their success. Herman also came into contact with many famous celebrities, diplomats, and members of the nobility. This, of course, was quite a change from the company of George Sand's, Lamennais, and their republican ideas. It was, in fact, no embarrassment to Herman, who dressed handsomely, neglected his lessons and his pupils, and very soon found himself without money. To find some, he gave a concert. It was a failure. Few attended, apart from the princess and her friends. Borrowing the necessary money, he set off for Hamburg, where he remained long enough to fall in love with a French pianist, and they became engaged. The affair soon came to nothing. Returning to Paris, he made friends with the celebrated singer Mario, an Italian of noble birth, and a director of the opera house. Herman accompanied Mario for his concerts, which were very successful. They traveled to London, where again they met with great success. Herman gave piano lessons and continued to gamble. He ended the season in London with a very successful concert. From 1837, when he was 16 years of age, until 1847, when his conversion took place, it is difficult to follow all the details of his life. We do know, however, that during these 10 years he led a very busy life, traveling and gambling. In 1837, no longer financially embarrassed, he went to Italy, where he was reunited with Liszt. There he resumed the composition of some of his melodies, and at the same time living regardless of expense. And so he was compelled to return to London to replenish his finances in order to go to Italy for a longer period of residence. The following spring he was in Milan, where he took himself seriously and composed 2 operas, which, though not devoid of merit, were not a success financially, due perhaps not only to his youthfulness, but also to the fact that they were impregnated with a certain religious and melancholy undertone, perhaps indicating the direction in which he was thinking. Towards the end of 1846, we find him in Paris, staying with his friend Adalbert de Beaumont, a painter. Herman, in a letter to Father Alphonse Ratisbonne, remarked that at that period of his life, he was no worse than 3/4 of the men around him, tolerating everything in others, rendering a service if the opportunity came his way, making no scruple to do a bad turn in retaliation for anything that might have provoked him. He added, "And is this not the life of nearly all the young men of the world of artists? I do not exaggerate, I affirm it. All the young men of my acquaintance lived as I did, seeking pleasure wherever it was to be found, ardently desiring riches in order to be able to follow all the inclinations and gratifying every caprice." Unquote. His passion for gambling was increasing. Large sums of money were staked and lost. Herman had little or no respect for the Catholic Church and her priests. Actually, he knew little or nothing about the Church, and the only priest he ever met was the apostate ex-priest Lamennais. At 26, in 1847, the year of his conversion, he had retained little religious leanings. organ music moved him profoundly, which momentarily made him think of the grandeur of God. He treasured a Bible which Liszt gave him in Geneva with the inscription, "Blessed are the pure of heart." It was Herman's first encounter with the words of Jesus, but he soon forgot them. Herman never set out to be a Catholic. His conversion came dramatically. It happened in May 1847 in the church of St. Valère, Paris, now demolished. Herman told his Spanish tutor, Chevalier Asnareth, how it all happened. I quote, "It happened in the month of May 1847. Mary's month was celebrated with great pomp at the church of St. Valère. Prince Moskva, who organized the music, and who was known to me, asked me if I would stand in for him and direct the choirs. I agreed, and went to take my place purely from my interest in music and a desire to do the job well. At the moment of benediction, I felt something deep within me, as if I had found myself. I was bowing my head. When I returned the following Friday, the same thing happened, and I thought of becoming a Catholic. A few days later, I was passing the same church of St. Valère while the bell was ringing for Mass. I went in and attended Mass with devotion and stayed on for several more Masses, not understanding what was holding me there." Unquote. Early in July, he confided in the Duchesse de Rauzan and ended by asking her to introduce him to a Catholic priest, as he wanted to be instructed in the faith of the Catholic Church, to which he was ardently drawn. He was introduced to the Abbé Legrand, his first encounter with a Catholic priest. "I had dread of priests," he wrote later. "I only knew them as they were portrayed in worthless romances, as intolerant men in whose mouths are incessant threats of excommunication and the flames of hell. I now found myself in the presence of a highly educated man, modest, kind, and frank, expecting everything from God and nothing from himself." Unquote. The Abbé gave him a book on Catholic doctrine to read. With these experiences fresh in his mind, he journeyed to Ems to give a concert. The following morning, being a Sunday, and braving the ridicule of his friends, he went to Mass. In his confessions he wrote, "There in the church at Ems, little by little, the presence of a superhuman power began to agitate me in all its strength. At the moment of elevation, I suddenly experienced what must have been felt by St. Augustine in the garden of Cassiacum, when he heard the memorable Tolle, Tolle, take and read. I felt springing up from the depths of my heart and conscience the keenest remorse for all my past life." Unquote. Outside the church, Herman met the wife of an ambassador to the French government. It was obvious to her that some remarkable change had taken place in his life. She questioned him, and he related to her some of the details of his conversion. "She said to me," Herman wrote, "that I must attribute all these great favors which had been bestowed upon me to the intercession of the Blessed Mary, and that I must hold her in particular veneration. Then she gave me a little picture of the glorious Assumption of Mary. From that day forth, every step that I have had the happiness of taking in the way of Christ, I owe to her who is the mother of us all." Herman left Ems and returned to Paris to consult with the Abbé Legrand. He spent his days studying the doctrine of Christianity. He was already observing all the practices of the Catholic Church: morning and evening prayer, Mass, benediction, fast and abstinence. The Abbé received him every evening, taught him, and trained him in the ways of the Church. The Abbé introduced him to Father Theodore Ratisbonne, also a convert from Judaism, who at that time was involved in a movement for convert Jewish girls, which eventually grew into the Institute of Our Lady of Sion. Father Theodore was preparing to administer the sacrament of baptism to some Jewish converts in the chapel of Our Lady of Sion, Paris, on the 15th of August, 1847, the feast of the Assumption. The Abbé Legrand suggested that Herman should attend this ceremony by way of preparation for his own baptism. Herman did so and was deeply impressed. The date fixed for Herman's baptism was the 28th of August, 1847, which was the feast of St. Augustine, who became his patron. Herman later wrote, "On Saturday, August the 28th, at 3 o'clock, the chapel of Our Lady of Sion was brightly lit by candles and the altar adorned with fresh flowers. The chapel bells were ringing. There was a full congregation, and the choir consisted of young girls wearing white veils, singing beautifully, and accompanied by the organ. Both Father Legrand and Father Rathesbon led me into the church, accompanied by my godfather and godmother. I was feeling nervous but calm." Unquote. On the 8th of September, he received his first Holy Communion, a day he longed for more than anything else. He was, as he said, a convert of the Eucharist. In his preface to Cantique du Sacrement, he wrote, "My songs must mingle with the hymns of Paris, for it was in that great city, and hidden beneath the Eucharistic veils, you revealed to me your real presence in the sacrament. Did I not, though still a Jew, desire to fly to the holy table in order to receive you into my longing heart?" 20 days after his baptism, Herman made a vow to enter holy orders and to consecrate himself to the Lord's service, if so would be the will of God. However, because of his enormous debts, he was compelled to mingle with his friends, his associates in the musical world, to give lessons and concerts. It was a testing time, a time to settle down, to become a Catholic before taking on further works of supererogation, especially the priesthood and the religious life. For the 2 years after his baptism, he led a busy life. However, he always found time to practice both mental and vocal prayer. Between lessons or visits to friends or students, he said the rosary, meditated on some religious subject, or read some spiritual book. It was well after midnight when he retired to rest. The Mass remained his life. He communicated frequently and assisted at Mass daily.